Good morning, good day, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to WoTA Association's webinar about sport pools, the evolution of betting. Or maybe shall we say it's time to stop talking and get into action. My name is Ylva Svensson, and I will be your host for the coming about 40 minutes. We will be listening to three interesting people within the industry, and I will present them shortly. My voice is a bit strange, maybe you hear, but I'm recovering from the flu. Maybe I should have done as the wolf in Little Red Riding Hood and eaten some chalk, but there was no one to be found at home, so you have to endure. Some of you might have been in Berlin, where sport pool was one of the topics, and sport pools is an ongoing and also very prioritized project within WoTA and has been for a couple of years. And last weeks, I think we finally see a path forward. And also this webinar is a little bit about this, but it's also a way for us to hear a person who was really missed in Berlin, and that is Joe from NASCAR. After these three presentations, there will be time for discussions and questions. So I encourage the audience to send all questions through the chat, and we will take it from there. So enough about me. So I'm very delighted to have three interesting speakers today. First of all, we have Mr. Joe Solosky, who is Managing Director for NASCAR, for sports betting at NASCAR. We also have Gordon Lennox, Vice President, Growth and Strategy at First Technologies, and then also Mr. Donovan Ruthven from PGI. But first, over to you, Joe. You didn't make it to Berlin last time, but we're happy to have you on link. So where in the world are you sitting right now? And I hope for your sake, the weather is better than here in Stockholm, Sweden.
Well, I can guarantee you the weather is better in Charlotte, North Carolina than it is in Stockholm, Sweden right now.
Sounds
And
like
it is quite early though. It's 7 a.m. So bright and early morning for me. I'm usually not dolled up and dressed up like this at this time, but for this group, I'm happy to do so.
We're
Um,
very happy to have you.
yeah. Um, yeah, as you alluded to, unfortunately, I missed the event in Berlin a couple of months ago. That story is for another time, but happy to reminisce with others as to why I did miss that show, but happy to be here today regardless.
Yes, perfect. So it's going to be interesting to hear a little bit about your thoughts behind this new take on sports betting for NASCAR going into pari-mutuel project.
Mhm.
So I will give the voice over to you for a couple of minutes. Thank
All right,
you.
perfect. Thank you. Well, just as a matter of introduction before I get into my presentation, I've been with NASCAR now it'll be 5 years in March. NASCAR brought me on board to start up their sports betting division at the league. Most, if not all, leagues in the U.S. now have someone who oversees their sports betting partnerships, integrity, gaming, casino, lottery program. I came to NASCAR with 5 years of experience prior to my time at NASCAR with Sport Radar. First internationally with 5 years or 3 years in Germany, handling accounts in Africa and Asia. And then when sports betting legalized in the US in 2018, I joined Sport Radar's US sales team and sold their data products throughout the US emerging sports betting market from 2018 to 2021. So very excited to share what we're doing here at NASCAR. Share a little bit more about the sport as well, in case anyone is unfamiliar with it. I won't go into that too much, but if there are questions, happy to answer. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go through kind of a framework of a presentation that I put together for this conversation. Can I get a thumbs up, Ylva, on if we're good to go on seeing my screen? All right, perfect. Great. So just to give an overview of where we're positioned as a sport in the sports betting world. So sports betting, again, in the US, for those who aren't aware, has only been legal outside of Las Vegas since 2018, and it is legalized on a state-by-state basis. So as of Monday, December 1st, there are now 31 states that offer online sports betting out of the 50 states in the US. And that slowdown of legalization is continuing to halt. We're not sure if there's going to be any states that legalize this year. That being said, since I joined NASCAR in 2021, we've entered in a couple of handful of partnerships in this space. Starting on the sportsbook side, we're partnered with DraftKings, FanDuel, BetMGM, Hard Rock, and as of 2 days ago, no longer ESPN Bet, but now called the Score Bet. Those groups make up 90% of market share in the US in terms of betting volume. Um, from 2018 to now, there were, I don't know, close to 30 different sports books that had launched in the first couple of years, and now the space has really consolidated into a handful or maybe just a little bit more, six, seven, eight legitimate players in the space. DraftKings and FanDuel make up about 70% of the market share, and the other five or six sports books are fighting for that 30%. Um, on the data side, and our partnerships look very different from one to another. I would say three of the five are more traditional marketing and sponsorship partnerships, whereas the DraftKings and the ScoreBet, owned by Penn, are more legalization partnerships where because a state legalizes in a certain way and NASCAR has the right to sub-license a sports betting license, we have partnerships in with DraftKings and the ScoreBet in those fashions. On the data side, we are partnered with Sportradar. Sportradar, again, who I used to work for 5 years, they distribute our live odds and pre-match odds to global sports books. NVenue is another partner we have on the data front that's more focused on micro markets and live betting. So they focus more on stage by stage betting or eventually lap by lap betting, and those smaller kind of granular markets that are popular in other major sports in the US. On the integrity front, we're partnered with Sportradar. Again, Sportradar monitors our races on a weekly basis for potential match fixing issues, any sort of suspicious betting activity. We work very closely with them on an ad hoc basis for any sort of investigations that we want done in the space. We have a iGaming product that launched over the summer, an online casino product that launched in 2 states with a developer called 916 Gaming. It's a really fun product that's available on a couple of our different operating partners. Just a traditional NASCAR casino slots game that you can play in the 7 states that have legalized online casino play. And then why we're here, partnered in the parimutuel space with First Technology. That partnership has been executed now for, I believe, a little over 2 years, and have been very pleasantly pleased with our collaboration and where the product is going. And I'll go into kind of the details on what that looks like in a moment. Just to give a quick background on NASCAR sports betting trajectory, because it gets into why the partnership with First. Um, in 2020 to 2021, we had 10x growth year over year, 52% flat, 10% growth. So you've seen that our growth has really stagnated from the early days. A lot of that is because we started out at such a low number. NASCAR was such a low wagered on sport at the advent of legalization in the US, that there was only room for growth. So that's why we saw that extreme growth. And now there's been stagnation. A lot of that is due to the product, the NASCAR betting product on fixed odds operators being very stale and not competing with the NFL, NHL, MLB soccer products where you can bet on hundreds, thousands of different markets. NASCAR is very limited in what they offer. So one of the biggest challenges that I found in my job that my peers at other leagues don't have to really worry about is that the demand is organically there for sports books to create these, exotic markets or granular live markets for some of the major sports like football, soccer, basketball, hockey, baseball, etc. For NASCAR, it's kind of been a chicken or the egg problem that I dealt with for about 2 years of just revolving door of telling operators that, hey, you need to improve the NASCAR product. And they tell me, well, there's no betting volume on it. And then I tell them, well, there's no betting volume on it because the product is bad. So I realized we kind of had to take things into our own hands and be the ones who actually build or condone the building of a strong NASCAR product. One of the reasons that I hypothesize this is NASCAR is the number two watch sport in the US on a per event basis, yet we are barely in the top 10 of sports betting volume. If you look at sports betting volume by other sports, they're very correlated to broadcast audience and popularity. For us, being the number two sport, we should be a lot higher in terms of betting volume, and we're not. And then live betting. There's really no live betting options for NASCAR. It accounts for less than 10% of bets. Obviously, that's where a lot of the GGR or the higher hold markets come from. So again, sportsbooks don't see a lot of value from our sport not offering live betting, whereas we're closer to that 50% mix in other sports. And then lastly, which is important to our first partnership, is our official data feed. So unlike sports like soccer, football, or basketball, where you can see all the action on your broadcast or on TV, motorsports like golf is one that you require kind of trust or data to provide what's going on, because for NASCAR and for golf as well, there's action going on during a commercial. You can't see the full field of competitors during a race. So it does require that data feed to actually price and offer markets in real time accurately. So ultimately, why the partnership with First? The economics for pool betting, we believe, provides a solve for many of the hurdles that I previously mentioned that motorsports wagering currently faces. I believe that, and we've seen it with the build out thus far with First, is that because of the economics of pool betting, these markets can be offered relatively low risk, that the operators are a little bit risk averse to offer. And as long as the liquidity is there and people are wagering on those markets, we'll see the uptick in growth and use that as a use case potentially for fixed odds operators to invest in the sport a bit more, knowing the potential is higher than they initially had seen. Lastly, I'll just kind of go into why we ventured into this space to begin with. And I think it'll go into a little bit of your questions as well. So I don't know, it was about 3.5 years ago, I started to think about horse race betting in the US and its popularity, and why NASCAR is not a pari-mutuel product. The format is very similar. And I reached out to a couple of different groups in this space, and what they had told me essentially was that they viewed, the regulation would be way too much for NASCAR on its own to get through, and they were not willing to help us out in that sense. So basically told me a nice way to just kind of, look elsewhere. So we eventually got the introduction to First Technology, and they'd been looking at this potential for quite some time and just hadn't had the right person to talk to at a motorsports organization. And, really kicked off from there. And, we're in the midst of, and Will can get into this a bit more than I can, but in the midst of product build, regulator conversations, operator conversations to get this product off the ground. And from the top levels at NASCAR, we're very, very bullish on this product. So happy to answer any questions and hand off to my fellow participants as well.
Thank you very much, Joe. Yeah, we will have some questions, but I of course, it's you can't but say how popular this sport is in US, which is a huge market. As also, I mean, many on the audiences, and me included, we are from Europe, where NASCAR isn't that big. But of course, we all know about it. So it's going to be very interesting to follow this project, since it's also, I mean, if you look at horse racing, it's also betting on horses is very connected with financing and an entire industry, where I think having a sports body into this project makes it, you can, because otherwise when you're betting on sports, it's not the same. It's more, maybe I wouldn't say soulless, but it's, if you can also almost connect betting with on horses to a good thing because it supports the
Mhm.
industry. So I think it's very interesting, and as you have this big fan base, of course, it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of strategy you will use to educate. I think education is something that you will. Is that something in a part of your strategy to how to educate people to bet?
Mhm.
Can you
Yeah,
say something?
it is. Yeah, it is. That's a big part of it. Once this
Yeah.
product goes live, is the education and content, and that's where NASCAR's channels around broadcast, around our website, social media handles, have the power to talk to our fan base and that audience to educate them on this product.
Thank you. So we will come back to you with additional questions, but let's open the scene for the next speaker, Will Gordon Lennox, the Vice President at First Technologies. I think most of the audience know about First Technologies, but you're one of the leading operators. You're a tech provider operating. You have Amtote, and you also have a number of operators like ExpressBet, FirstBet. Yeah, so you're a huge player. So take it away.
Thanks, Ylva. And you can see my screen, I hope.
Yes, perfect.
Great. So, yeah, some of you will have been in Berlin, and this is something of a continuation on what I talked about at that forum. We discussed what sports pools are, what they look like now, and what they might look like in the future, and hopefully why they can become integral to WoTA member markets. So today I'm going to go into a bit more depth about how we're building these products, and hopefully how we can occupy space in people's minds, despite all of the external noise. Obviously, this is a pretty big challenge, given what we're competing with. But I think with a shared and concerted effort from this group, people on this call and at WoTA, there's no reason that we can't make sports pools a fixture in the psyche of those who want to bet and want to engage with sport. So, as you know, as I discussed last time, starting from scratch, as we are with NASCAR, is both a blessing and a curse. I think we've got the chance to build something really fun and hopefully quite remarkable for NASCAR and with NASCAR, but not having any precedents in this space is a challenge. So when we're fighting for the attention of the customer, we have to acknowledge that we're starting with something new. And because of this, I think familiarity is a really important place for us to begin. As Joe said, NASCAR is a hugely popular sport. In many metrics, the second biggest sport in the US. But it's not currently an A-tier betting sport. So the way we're looking to combat that is by finding that cross-section of fans who either like NASCAR but don't like betting, or like betting but haven't yet got into NASCAR. So we're trying to cross-pollinate these two groups by offering, in the first instance, fairly recognizable pools. So your classic win place, exacta, trifecta, stage winners, manufacturer style bets, the bet types that feel really familiar to anybody who's ever watched horse racing. There are a million and one exciting things that we can do and that we plan to do across lap to lap betting, jackpots, and so many different, sometimes more complicated bet types, as well as in play. But I think that will come with time. One of the great things about NASCAR and one of the reasons I think it works so well for pool betting is that there are so many bet types that we can build. There are loads of overtakes, different leaders, and relatively unpredictable results. So we're not constrained by those things which can really hamstring a betting product. So we've got the chance to test and learn. And then as we do so, we can focus our efforts on those products that really resonate with customers. Again, in the last talk, we discussed the significance of working with sporting bodies to give sports pools relevance and precedence. I still think that without the backing of a given league, we're always chasing customers that have a pre-programmed relationship with the sport in question. As a collective, we're also competing with TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc., as well as those fixed odds operators. Now, the communities around sport are obviously very large, very intense, but they are very different to the ways in which people currently consume sports betting. Now, they're both super high emotion. When your team wins or when your bet wins, it's a very similar feeling. But sports fans experience this communitarian sort of feeling. They're always interacting with friends or rivals about the last match, the last race, or the next race, the next team selection, what they think is going to happen. And this is still true in some parts of the world. I was in Australia for the Melbourne Cup, and someone was telling me about the culture around betting in club cricket. You are the odd one out if you're not having a quaddie at the weekend. In the UK, certainly in my experience, betting is becoming more and more reclusive. Although there are obviously still groups of friends, etc., that discuss their bets in great depth, it's much more common around fantasy football or something more akin to that. They take their team's performances so incredibly seriously, and it permeates not just through friend groups, but through office culture, online forums, and well beyond. Now, I don't think it's a huge leap to suggest that sports pools can occupy the space between these things. It is ultimately betting at its heart, and that's not something that we're trying to change. But a pool is also first and foremost the community. It is like Kalshi or Poly markets. It's a peer-to-peer transaction. You're pitting your wits against people with similar interests and shared passions, but with different opinions. So ultimately, it's a battle of intellect and skill, but it's so often pushed behind closed doors and hidden away because people are worried about talking about betting. So what can we do about this? I think, once again, it comes down to collaboration. If we can work together to ingrain sports pools in that sporting psyche alongside the leagues and the teams that people love, then we can become a part of the conversation that still dominates people's thoughts. Now, something else I talked about and mentioned shortly beforehand is our relationship as pool operators with fixed odds operators. There's no doubt that this is in some way a competition. We're fighting for the same share of wallet from the same customers. And obviously, I don't just mean the legitimate operators that so many of us here partner with, but grey and black market operators as well. In this, I will be focusing on the former, though. I think getting into the grey and black market now is probably a little more complex than we've got time for. But anyway, I think one of the things we have to start doing is learning from what these big operators are doing. They are such massive operations, such huge companies spending vast amounts of money, and we should be using that to influence our progress and our ambition, as well as using some of their work to influence our products. But competition doesn't have to rule out collaboration. Fixed odds operators are a key partner for First. I'm sure some of you know that we distribute almost all of American horse racing content to global betting partners, and we work in the fixed odds space there as well. There's a huge opportunity to use this distribution network to expand the reach of sports pools and really inflate liquidity through that recreational player base. I think one of the major challenges we've experienced when talking to operators so far is that they see their core products as higher margin than some of our pool products. And when you look at the bare takeout, a lot of these pools are pretty high margin products. But once you acknowledge how many ways that takeout has to be split, it's quite difficult to reach the margin attained by the very, very best products, i.e. football in the UK, NFL in the US. I think we have to think a bit differently when we're selling to operators. How can we bring them products that can offer new groups of people that they can then convert to their core products? So we need to be solving a problem for them rather than trying to sell them something that they might actually see as a detractor to their margin. So when we have a sport like NASCAR, you've got a huge viewership, many of which will not be current customers to sports books. So if we can help them bring new customers on board by bringing them a sport that has so many fans, suddenly we're solving a problem for them rather than asking them for a favor. Now, hopefully when the product becomes a success, it can become a central part of their overall strategy. But until that's the case, I think we need to encourage operators to innovate for reasons that benefit them now, rather than offering them something that we are very confident will be a success, but won't really impact their balance sheet for a year or two. Now, commingling seems to dominate pretty much every conversation we have at WoTA. I'm sure everybody on this call knows the significance of commingling, and if we don't, then I think we've probably got bigger issues than those being posed by sports pools. But sports pools hopefully pose a different question to horse racing when considering commingling. There are intricacies of horse racing that usually stem from a sort of bygone era that make commingling a bit difficult. Different bet types, different systems, etc. So now that we can start afresh, I think we've got the chance to go beyond borders and commingle with as many jurisdictions as possible. I know we're tight for time, so I will finish on this point. These major sports are now pretty much borderless. Everyone's consuming content on their phones, either watching highlights on Instagram, replays on YouTube, whatever it is, it's a shared community in the truest sense. So if we can help bridge that gap as a pool, then I think we can operate in a really unique space. Thanks, Ylva.
No, we have time. It was very interesting. I think you are really getting into something there. The need for innovation, revitalization. Also, I think it was very beautiful said. It is about pool betting is like a community, and there are so many things we can do within that community. We will come back with some additional questions for you. There are some questions in the chat, but I will now give the word over to Donovan from PGI Business Executive.
Thank you, Ylva.
Thank you,
Just
Donovan.
like to, thank you. I'm just going to share some of my screens. Right, let me know that it's all coming through, Ylva. Ylva will be good. Thank you very much. Right, firstly, Ylva, thank you very much to you and WoTA for putting this together. And secondly, to my fellow panelists, Joe and Will, some very interesting topics. And certainly, I hope some of the presentation and the detail that I put in my presentation actually dovetails quite succinctly and decently with what the two panelists have had to say. So we've been talking about this for a while, and from my understanding with WoTA, it's been a discussion point for a number of years. So what I'd like to do is try and see how we can move the discussion forward. There's been a number of points there with respect to the simplicity of bet types coming from Will, the focus on the simple and exotic bets, which I thought was an interesting point there that Will raised, and then the discussions with sport leagues. I think that's an important part of what we're trying to do here. And then lastly, the symbiotic relationship that Will envisages with respect to fixed odds and the tote betting. So I think all very interesting points and probably something we can reflect on. What I'd like to do is look back at what racing has actually taught us regarding commingling, and then reflect on that moving forward with respect to the pool bets. Now, we all know that commingling has been positive for the racing industry, and there's been increase of liquidity. Liquidity breeds liquidity, so they say. But the key thing there is the ownership of the liquidity is very important. Betting churn in our environment from a racing perspective is also paramount. The second is that bet types, takeouts across jurisdictions are difficult to navigate commercially and technically, and that is still the case today after how many years that we've been talking to each other regarding commingling. Bet rules have a significant impact on commingling accessibility and the understanding. However, over the last couple of years, it's common knowledge now that host tote rules should apply, and more simple the rules are, the better the trust and administration that we have. That is critical for both your guessing operator as well as the host credibility. Tote technology and integration is time consuming. However, there's a number of integrations that have taken place around the world. I think the last count we've done 12 or 13 integrations into various totes around the world and jurisdictions. So we have got the connections throughout the world, and obviously we can leverage those when we talk about sports pool betting. One of the next issues that we've got to discuss there, and I think both Will and Joe actually alluded to that, is the data. Now, we don't know what data is required from a sports pool betting and what level of data is required. I think this is all very new for us as a tote operator, but certainly in the racing environment, live tote as well as historical totes is imperative. And of course, with respect to that, it's also the localized formats that make a significant difference for those punters that are on the ground in foreign jurisdictions that are betting on international racing. We also need to consider that distribution, simulcasting, and commingling infrastructure and operations are costly. This may not always be applicable in the sports betting environment where there is limited cost involved in that, but certainly we do need to understand the infrastructure involved in the operations for operating of those pools. There are racing quality and integrity issues in racing, and I think some of that is minimized and mitigated with respect to what we're finding in sports pools. Although I did take note of the integrity and regulation issues that Joe is spending such a large amount of time focusing on in his efforts to make his pool live. With respect to racing, we also have time zone and broadcast schedule impacts. Now, that is not something which is necessary in going to be the case in sports betting, but certainly that does need to be considered. There is also local regulatory and tax impacts that have impacted on the ability to commingle around the world. Whether that's going to be the same for sports betting, that's still to be decided. It might be on a jurisdiction basis. And then, of course, the big lesson over here for commingling is that larger payouts on racing and life-changing bets do make a difference, and it is a differentiator for racing. So what are we left with in the racing industry? We left with essentially three pools. We've got the World Pool, which sits at the pinnacle of the international collaboration, with one global tote controlling access to the pools on another jurisdiction's racing, and specified bet types. We've also got A pools, where jurisdiction players host commingled liquidity from global guests on its own domestic racing on specified bet types. And then we've got the more fragmented B pools where a territory hosts its own pools on locally defined bets on imported racing from around the world. What I'm trying to say is that in racing, we've got complexity at the heart of everything we do. Let's look at the current status with respect to racing. We've been talking about commingling. I think commingling had its genesis circa 20 years ago, maybe more. But ask the question, is the industry fully integrated? I think the answer there is no, it's not. We still have jurisdictions which are not able to commingle, certain jurisdictions which will only commingle, allow commingling inwards. And then, of course, you get the bi-directional jurisdictions, which ultimately we'd like to move towards. In consultation with a couple of experts for this presentation on sports pools, one senior exec in the industry said to me, "You're going to be long retired by the time this gets off the ground." Now, if that is the sentiment that is shared out there, it's no wonder WoTA's been talking about this for a while. I'm not as pessimistic, and I think the two other panelists are very optimistic about the initiative. So let's approach that, approach the sports pools from that perspective. One thing, however, I do want to say is that if the total industry approaches sports pools in the same way, with the same mindset that we still treat racing commingling, we're going to talk about the opportunity of sports pools long after the sun has set on the totalizator industry. What we need with respect to this is a bit of pragmatism, and certainly, Will, you've elaborated quite a bit on how you intend to target your punters, working with leagues and that, which I find very interesting. But certainly, we need to try and find a way to release the shackles. Now, I'm going to roll back a little bit towards marketing speak. In the world of commingling, I think it's my perception that we've got a complementary product. When you commingle on foreign racing that runs alongside your domestic product, it adds to the churn. It allows the operators in foreign jurisdictions to generate revenue, additional revenue, which then gets invested back into the sport. Sports pools differ, in my opinion, fundamentally from racing, though. However, because of the fact that the quantum of sports pools is significantly less. One of the stats that I looked at in preparing for this was that some 30% of racing is focused on domestic, whereas imported product makes up 70% in certain jurisdictions. Now, these figures can be manipulated depending on the jurisdiction we're talking about, but it's important to note that imported product only generates 13% of the handle, whereas the domestic racing had 87% of the handle on racing itself. So the question has to be asked, are they fundamentally the same product? And I would argue they're not. And we have to look at it differently, because in this particular case, if we're going back to marketing speak, and certainly I'm not a marketing guru, but what we are probably talking about here is a supplementary product, an additional product that runs alongside racing to generate additional revenue, incremental revenue for operators using the same infrastructure that is important to run racing. And I think that's the key thing. There are economies of scale when it comes to racing and tote. It is a crude assessment, and certainly there may be parties that can shoot down my assessment of complementary versus supplementary product. But I would like to challenge those people to think about the product price, place, and promotion of racing products versus the sports pool products, and then question what strategies are being applied and are they relevant? Because I think they're fundamentally different. Racing is differentiated on larger payouts, either on multiple runner bets or multiple leg bets. And well, it was interesting that you were focusing there on simple and exotic bets to start with. There is no significant churn that I can see in sports bets. And I don't know how many sports bets are on around the world, but certainly, on racing, there is many multiples of 10,000s of races run around the world every single year. That's not going to be the case, and that certainly isn't the case right now on sports pools. The other problem that I see is that individual leagues don't offer the same opportunity to create as many pools as racing does daily, which I've just alluded to. And the challenge then for the industry is to actually ask the question of how it's different. It's a fundamental question. How do sports pools and racing pools differ? Let's just reflect a little bit on sports. And we look at NASCAR there, but there's a variety of sports around the world. Every jurisdiction has its own local interests. Now, NASCAR is certainly the number two watch sport in the US, according to Joe's information. I certainly don't know much about NASCAR, but that's a big viewership in the American market. There is also season and league durations which differ across all the sports. We do need to consider the frequency of matches and the quantum of matches that we can actually put into these pools. And then, as Will mentioned, keep it simple with respect to the rules. The bet structure, remembering that tote has multiple runner bets as well as multiple leg bets. Do we need data, and what does this look like? Now, Joe, from your background at Sports Radar, certainly I don't have the answer to that, but we do need to reflect on what is required for sports pool bets. We also need to look as operators at how we optimize the number of pools on a daily, weekly basis. And then last but not least, which I think that the NASCAR exercise is showing us, that there is a bet brand building exercise in amongst the consumers that are going to consume the actual product. I want to finish up by reflecting on, are there any solutions? Because certainly what we don't want to do is walk away and say this is too difficult. If we did that in racing, we would never be sitting where we are today. I do believe that there's a multi-pronged approach. Is world sports pools the first thing that we should do? I'm not convinced. Let's consider the example of NASCAR. They're looking at a localized bet for the local market. And once that's off the ground, who knows what actually happens and who might have an interest in wagering on that particular product from around the world. I do believe that we've got to focus on creating the local pools that can cater to the local market, build that bet, build the product reputation, build the brand surrounding the bet, and then prepare that for commingling if there are parties that are interested. That's one aspect or one prong of all of them. The other consideration is those operators that do have existing pool bets, and they are there. They should be encouraged to start commingling or look at commingling more broadly. Ylva, I know that your operator or your company that you work for does have certain sports bets. I know we integrated. We walk here a long road to get to the point where we can actually activate that. It's not an easy thing to do, but certainly there are opportunities out there, and there's, from what I can see, there are many people who are willing to actually place bets into that. Let's share the learning in amongst us operators that have built these sports pools. It is important to actually continuously understand what it takes to build those brands, to build those bet types, and to build the liquidity and following that the local customers have got on those bets. PGI already has, as I said earlier, some 12 or 13 connections around the world. And that means that there are connections that are willing to actually place bets and pass their retail money through to foreign jurisdictions on those bet types if there is a demand and an interest in the product. But certainly we need to start talking to each other a little bit more about the opportunities there. And then lastly, we've discussed a neutral host. Now, PGR's core competence is removing the blockages to hosting and having pools. I think what we're trying to do there is remove the blockages with respect to the bet type, the bet rules, as well as the regulatory approvals that are required to create new bets in local markets. We can do that on the Isle of Man quite freely. Let's also start considering removing the commercial constraints regarding the ownership of the bet and the liquidity that is sitting in the pools, as well as who hosts the pools and what sports to actually include. We can host your local bets remotely and connect all the approved guests that are sitting around the world into your pool. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you, Donovan. Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, it's interesting to talk about the ownership of the pools, because if you have horse racing, it's very clear. You have a rights holder, and it's you can charge. You have a licensing fee, you have a host fee. But if you would say something about if you look at, well, let's say the pools you are connected to, it's for racing and it's also ATG pools. How would you say that like a good what kind of business model would you see is suitable for sports pools?
Look, Ylva, that would require me to be prescriptive, and I certainly don't want to do that, particularly to ATG or to Full Racing. I respect what they've done with their pools and that, and what they've done to build them. I think what we've got to do is we just got to understand where the ownership and the liquidity lies. That's first and foremost, and how that ownership translates into a commercial model which makes sense for all parties.
I agree. So we have some questions from the audience, which is actually tied in. This is someone here is asking at what percentage of GGR would NASCAR selling their pools to operators? This is of course nothing I think Joe or Will is ready to talk about, but it ties in, of course, to where you have a brand owner. You need to it's different from where you actually just have a pool host, but someone who's also created the product. So it's worth something. And I don't know if if you are willing to comment on that question from the audience.
No,
It's
no,
early days.
No, not on the first question.
Yeah.
That will stay with NASCAR. But in terms of the second question, I think it's a very good and interesting point. I think, as Donovan alluded to at the end of his presentation there, it's really important to build the foundational liquidity in the primary jurisdiction. For some sports, there is no primary jurisdiction. There are so many fans of certain sports in different countries that you can, I hope, create either individual pools and then commingle them, or one commingled pool from the outset, I hope. With NASCAR, they've got an incredibly engaged fan base and an incredibly large fan base in the US. So we're really excited to target those audience members that they've already got, to build that foundation of recreational liquidity. And then, once the liquidity is there, hopefully that becomes a reason for international betting fans to start to enjoy NASCAR as much as it is the other way around. So once that foundational liquidity has been built in the US, and actually in specific parts of the US, then I think we can begin to take it global.
Interesting. So a final question for you. I mean, First Technology, you're truly holding a global footprint. You're also connected to a number of operators around the world. As you said, you're also selling fixed odds. You have a big network of bookmakers where you sell your US racing. You also partnerships with other jurisdictions. If you look worldwide, like a final question for you, where do you think pool betting, sport pools would be a good product? And do you see it, except motorsport, do you see any other sport that is something that you should grasp for in the near future?
So in terms of jurisdictions, I think without trying, it's very difficult to know. I mean, I'm based out of London, and the UK is about the most saturated betting market in the world, right? I mean, there are so many fixed odds operators fighting for the same spend from the same customers. So booting a new product here is always going to be very difficult. Then you've got other countries that are pool monopolies, where you might have more attention from the customers simply because they don't have the same optionality. So it's a bit easier to get their attention if they want to gamble. But then there's perhaps not such a betting culture in some of those places. So, there are two sides to every coin. We just have to take each jurisdiction as it comes, because none of them are going to be straightforward from a licensing and regs perspective. So there are plenty of things for us to consider with each one. And in terms of other sports, as I spoke about a bit in Berlin, I think we have to try to build products that are difficult to replicate for fixed odds operators. We have to do something that is innovative and different. Kalshi and Polymarkets have come in and built very, very simple products, sort of out of necessity. If you go onto their websites, they are so easy to use. They're so uncomplicated, but they are innovative. So I think it's a really interesting test case that, pool betting should learn from. Ultimately, it's peer-to-peer betting. I'll take one side, you take the other. It's not a complicated system.
I agree. It's very easy to understand.
Yeah, I think that's something that we need to learn from. And then on top of that, we want to look at the fan bases of certain sports and then decide what sports will lend themselves best to pool betting.
Agree. Okay, thank you. So I have a final question for Joe before we leave today. We know about your US focus, but also would you really, like from day one, do you see also this product going into on a more of a global scale? Can you tell us a little bit about your roadmap?
Yeah, for sure. So, much of this is collaboration, right, with First. So, I wouldn't say one of us has more say over the other in terms of jurisdiction. I think that, well, I guess I put it this way, that the regulatory scheme in the US on a state-by-state basis is extremely onerous and difficult. We are navigating that as a team on a state-by-state level, along with external counsel on how to approach that. If there are other jurisdictions that can launch this product under a fully regulated operation quicker than when we launch in the US, I don't think that that's a far-fetched idea or something that would be negative. I think that showing operators and showing state regulators in the US that may be hesitant to adopt the product, that there is a demand for a product like this in another jurisdiction that is more mature than us, would be a good thing. So it's still kind of TBD, but I don't think that there's a con for this launching in a jurisdiction where maybe NASCAR isn't as popular, if it does show and does bring a quicker adoption in the US.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I have a question from the audience. The person is anonymous. No, Donovan, for you, Donovan. So is the sport pool customer the same as the racing pool for football pools hosted by PGI? Is the sport pool customer? You can see the question yourself in the Q&A. Is the sport pool customer the same as the racing pool for the football pool hosted by PGI?
It's a very good question.
Very good question.
Certainly, we don't own the retail customer itself. We host the pool on behalf of somebody else. So it's probably a question that we could ask them, but I would suspect that there is a certain overlap in terms of the retail customer that actually does place bets on sport versus those that actually place the bets on the racing.
Yeah, I mean, we see that also, of course, at ATG. We used to be a very traditional tote horse betting company. Now we have sport pools, we have sportbook, and there's definitely an overlap between pool betting customers for us. We will have a final question for you, or maybe for everyone, but it's where we discuss how to have a fresh start, not to get caught in what has been the problem. Why, after 20 plus years, horse racing is still not, we're not integrated. I mean, there are of course territories where it's not legally approved, but what can we do now in this fresh start for this kind of project that's happening with NASCAR, etc., to have a fresh start? Do you have some last words to give away to the audience, Donovan?
I think, Ylva, what we do need to do is just approach this pragmatically. It's not easy. There are jurisdictions that are not allowed to commingle, and there are jurisdictions that are cautious about the implications of commingling. It's been proven that it does work around the world. Let's continue the conversations. Let's look at creating of bed types, and those operators, as I said earlier, those operators that actually have sports pools. How do we engage in that? If we can facilitate that as PGI, certainly we would gladly assist. But again, it doesn't have to be PGI. The operators can talk to each other. We travel around the world all the time. We bump into each other, in different jurisdictions. There is no reason why we can't start talking in amongst ourselves, not necessarily on the WoTA forum, about these matters, but continue engaging. There is opportunity out there. There's certainly it's certainly made easier through the experience of racing and the commingling connections that have been set up around the world over the last 15, 20 years to actually make this a reality. So continue talking, and let's see what we can collectively do. And again, take the leap, use NASCAR as an example. Let's go and create those bed types in the local market that cater to the local need. If there is a resonance in other markets, there's an additional opportunity then to actually generate additional liquidity.
Perfect. Good answer. Let's stay talking, even though we also want action. So I think we're about to wrap up this webinar. I'm happy that it took more than 40 minutes. We had an hour. We almost used it all. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joe, Will, Donovan, and thank you, Florence, for helping facilitating this. And thank you to the audience. And stay tuned. More to come from WoTA.